Tonight on Business Live, you could pay for an astronomical increase in electricity bills from August as the Electricity Company of Ghana demands a 148% increase in tariffs to cover the period of 2019 and 2020. Meanwhile, the Institute of Energy Security charges government to publish the true state of Ghana's power sector, as Joy Business Sources is telling us that recent power outages are due to a gas shortage. We'll hear from the Executive Director of the Institute of Energy Securities, Nana Mwasi, the 7th.
3 days after this incident, government is tight-lipped, become quite suspicious, and so we urge government to speak to the issue for Ghanaians to understand what exactly is happening, and that will shape our mind and our focus going forward.
Plus, tackling the escalating food prices, we'll hear from a senior research scientist who says investing in genetically modified crops could be the solution.
What we as scientists can do to deal with the public skepticism is to put ourselves out there and educate people. Most people don't realize that GM is just another one of the many tools that a plant breeder uses to produce new and improved varieties.
Now, if government fails to subsidize your electricity tariff, you could pay an astronomical increase in light bills from August, as the ECG is demanding a 148% increase in tariff. Now, a proposal from the power distributor submitted to the Public Utilities and Regulatory Commission (PLC) wants the adjustments to cover the period of 2019 and 2022. Now, the ECG has subsequently proposed an average increase of 7.6% in tariff over the next 4 years to cover distribution service charges. Charles Nixon-Yeboah has been looking through the proposal and has filed this report.
ECG attributed the high increase in the distribution service charge to the gap that has developed over the years between the actual cost recovery tariff and the PRC-approved tariffs, as well as the cost of completed projects. It also mentioned the continual application of the prevailing tariff, which was 14% lower beyond the stipulated regulatory period, and the effect of macroeconomic factors such as inflation and exchange rate fluctuation. The power distributor again pointed out that its financial sustainability is important as it impacts on the entire energy sector. With the huge investment needs facing the distribution industry over the next 5 years, ECG said it expects the proposed tariff increases would inevitably be approved to sustain efficiency and reliable electricity service. The ECG, however, recommended an engagement with the PRC on the determination of the defined threshold for a lower tariff for non-residential or commercial customers. The company seeks the support of government to introduce a streetlight tariff to enable it to properly account for full cost of streetlight consumption. It also anticipates that government would support its financial sustainability by absorbing all costs associated with excess capacity charges.
Of course, we shall be having a discussion on this matter with the ECG proposing a 148% increase in tariffs with Ben Boaja together with Apio Dumako shortly. But Joy Business understands the recent intermittent power outages across some parts of the country are due to gas shortage. The power plants that rely on gas have switched to light crude oil and diesel fuel oil to run their plants. Now, this is expected to impact on the cost of operations of business. We have more in this report.
According to information gathered by Joy Business, there's currently a shortfall or deficit of about 364 megawatts of power in the country. This has compelled the power authorities to shed load at Kaswa, Pokuase, and Almaso power plants in the central, Greater Accra, and Ashanti regions. The situation is said to have started 3 months ago and keep worsening. Joy Business gathers that Twin City and Sen Power currently run on light crude oil, while Scar Power is still down together with the combined cycle unit at Tico at Abuate in the western region. We further understand that managers of the Ghana Grid Company and the Electricity Company of Ghana over the weekend visited these power stations to ascertain the current situation. The operators of these power plants, however, promised to restore the load shed when gas pressures improve and additional generation units come on board.
Meanwhile, the Executive Director of the Institute of Energy Security, Nana Emoesi VII, has urged government to publish the true state of Ghana's power sector to enable businesses plan amidst the intermittent outages. His comment follows a report of gas shortages affecting thermal plants at Takoradi. Speaking on the issue, Nana Emoesi VII said government must be transparent to help businesses plan ahead of power cuts.
Trippings could, affect gas supply as well. One, the compressors that are pumping this gas from Atuabo have the same power or gets their power source from the same grid. And so if there is no seamless changeover to a standby plant, then of course it will be difficult to get the gas to this thermal plant. Also, when the power plant tripped and the compressors went down, it will take some time to get the shutdown valves to be activated. And so that's the challenge that we pick from the IES decks, if you ask.
Okay, and so we are told that they're now using light crude and diesel fuel oil. I'm just wondering, how sustainable is that?
Yes, when the trip occurred and gas pressures went low, some plants had to rely on fuel oil and light crude oil. As we speak, we get indication that T1 and T2 are back running on gas. Unfortunately, the steam components of these two plants are not back because when you trip this way, it takes some time and a lot of work to get them back into the stream. But it became quite worrying that almost 3 days after this incident, government is tight-lipped, become quite suspicious. And so we urge government to speak to the issue for Ghanaians to understand what exactly is happening, and that will shape our mind and our focus going forward.
You're still watching Business Live. I'm Charles Ayitey. To our top story, well, if government fails to subsidize your electricity tariff, you could pay for an increase in light bills from August, as the ECG is demanding a 148% increase in tariff, with a proposal from the power distributor on this, citing that this could be the best way to go to offshore debt. Well, we're joined more on this by the Regional Director of CART International, Kusi Epiadumako, as well as Executive Director at the Africa Center for Energy Policy, ASA, Benjamin Boache. Thankful, gentlemen, that you could join us. I want to start off with you, Mr. Boache. The ECG is making, a call, a request for a 148% increase in tariffs. How justified is it, from your perspective, having to deal with issues related to energy?
Thanks for having me. I think if you look at the tariff methodology and the required adjustments that are supposed to be done periodically, most of the inputs are priced in dollars. So by discounting that by the exchange rate alone, since the last adjustment, the tariff has lost about 30% in value. And if you check ECG's financials for 2021, ECG was only able to recover 50% of its revenue requirements, which means that there is a substantial gap that has to be filled. So the decision then is, how do you fill that revenue gap? Is government going to be able to bridge that financing gap that ECG requires, or they will want to pass it through the tariff to be able to offset that gap. You know, in 2021, government had to pump in $1.25 billion to be able to accommodate the shortfalls from ECG. I'm not sure where Ghana government will get $1.2 billion in 2022 to be able to address that kind of shortfall. And the reality is that if it is a subsidy, it sits with you and I. We have to find a way to pay for it somehow, you know, at some point in our lives. So it's a major conversation we need to have. How do we address this perennial under recoveries? In 2 years, our last report indicated that for 2020 and 2021 alone, government intervention in ECG was about 14 billion Ghana cedis. That is more than the amount of money we spent on road construction, on education infrastructure, on health infrastructure, on you know, other social interventions in country. So we are spending the resources that we need for development to prop the inefficiencies in the power sector. And we have consistently maintained that the way to address this is to tackle the inefficiencies across the value chain, which we have not been able to deal with. And that creates under recoveries that government has to find money to address periodically. So it is what it is. We have to find ways to pay the under recoveries, and either PRC will want to pass through you know, that full cost, or government will want to subsidize. But the latter is very dangerous because the current economic context doesn't give the room for government to subsidize. If you're talking about $1.2 billion in today's term, that is more than 9 billion cedis. Where is that going to come from? It is not in the budget.
Indeed.
All right. So these are the realities that confront us.
Let me bring
failure
in,
to have gone full investment from the private sector, as we sought to do around 2018, is the cause of all these problems. But the inefficiencies still persist, and yet the consumer is being called upon to pay for it.
Indeed, and speaking of the consumer, Apio Dumako, of course, with CAT International, you've been following the trends, and as he rightly stated, Mr. Boachi rightly stated, government at this present moment doesn't have the capacity. If so, it's going to be having some dire risk on our macroeconomic fundamentals to, you know, whip up close to $1 billion in terms of subsidies. From your point of view, where do you come in with the assessment of the impact it's going to really have on the business community, especially when this remains a chunk of their production cost?
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. I would say that I agree 100% with my friend Ben. The utility companies are actually operating in an environment where prices have gone, the macroeconomic fundamentals have shifted against them. Within the last couple of years, the cedi has depreciated a lot, inflation has gone high. And if we don't see an upward review in tariffs, perhaps we'll one day see the ECG having cardiac arrest and the whole country just going blank. And so for that point, I think that we need to support the increase in tariffs. But my concern is that what is the willingness to pay of consumers? Already prices of goods and other services have gone up. So people's disposable income have gone down. And so there's little much available for consumers. But I rather prefer to have electricity and pay for it than to have money and not have the electricity. For consumers, the effect of the utility increase would be much of a problem for them. But we still need to understand that things are not easy. We are not in good times, and we need to tighten our belt.
But what's going to be the impact? What's going to be the impact? What's going to be the impact on the manufacturing industry, the production houses? What's going to be the impact on that?
I think for the impact, we all know that it's going to increase the cost of production. That could also feed itself into the inflation rate that we are currently experiencing. And if care is also not taken, it can also affect the competitiveness of our country. Because we all find ourselves in a single market under the AFCFTA. So if goods that we are producing in Ghana is expensive because of our input tariff, then Ghana might not be a desirable place for business. That is my only concern. I also wanted to say that I was looking at the UCG, their projection for power losses. They were looking at between now and 2026, bring it down to about 20%, which I still think that UCG need to do more to reduce the system losses that it has, it's unable to touch. Perhaps if they're able to do more on that, possibly they can recover more of their revenue, and then most of the burden will not be shifted to consumers. That is what I would say.
Mr. Okosedu, I'm grateful that you could join us. Let's end with Mr. Ben Boakye. Of course, you have made it quite clear that subsidies at this point in time is next to impossible. But of course, the ECG is also making a proposal for some street light levies to offset the cost regarding its recovery. How do you relate this particular proposal from the ECG?
No, obviously, if energy prices is going to go up, every segment of the value chain in energy has to go up. And to the extent that, street lights consume power, that tariff cannot stay the same. So it will also be adjusted. But to what extent? I think on Wednesday, there will be a discussion where we would have to interrogate the numbers that ECG will present. And they will have to show clearly how they will reduce the waste and inefficiencies for us to continue to pay the tariff that they always want to push on the consumer. If you do not reduce the inefficiencies, the tendency is that people will still have room to steal power. So what you're going to do is to pile the burden on the few honest, legitimate customers that you do have. And many people, many businesses still continue to steal power and not pay for it. So those are significant questions that we want ECG to address when we meet PURC and the stakeholders on Wednesday.
We're looking forward to that meeting to see how it goes. Ben Boakye, grateful that you could join us. He's Executive Director with Asia. Well, we'll take you to Nigeria, where airline operators are in negotiations with the government over the spiraling cost of aviation fuel. Now, we have heard a lot of talk about boosting local production to ensure there is enough food supply. And is it time to seriously consider genetically modified crops? Well, Dr. Daniel Osei Ofosu is senior research scientist with Biotechnology and Nuclear Agrics Research Institute, and he's been speaking earlier on the marketplace.
Nitrogen is usually the base for most of the fertilizers. So we have nitrogen use-efficient crops that we can engineer. Another issue, and I think was mentioned just before this, was the issue of rains. The average farmer in Ghana does not have access to irrigation facilities. When you expect it to rain, it doesn't rain. And when it rains, it comes in torrents. We are able to engineer crops that use water efficiently, so very little water. We also have crops that can switch on and off their genes, such that if there's a flood, it just takes just the amount of water it needs, and if there's no flood, it goes to its normal use of water. There are so many ways that we can use GM technology to help solve some of these food crises that we are currently facing. And it all depends on the focus that as a country we want to push the technology. We can engineer crops that have the same attributes that peas, Burkina varieties have, and we can grow them even during the lean season, because it would use nutrients and use all the inputs efficiently. What we as scientists can do to deal with the public skepticism is to put ourselves out there and educate people. Most people don't realize that GM is just another tool. It's just one of the many tools that a plant breeder uses to produce new and improved varieties.
Well, we'll now take you to Nigeria because their airlines say that they've called off a plan to ground domestic flights in protest against the spiraling cost of aviation fuel. It has risen almost fourfold this year, which was unsustainable, according to the airline operators of Nigeria. The hikes have been triggered principally by Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the end of February. But the airlines say the flights will now go ahead as negotiations with government are continuing. Earlier on the marketplace, my colleague Daryl Kwao spoke to Bukula Joe Oketumbi of Channels TV.
As we all know, aviation fuel powers the aircraft. And for most airlines, that's about 40% of their operating cost. But in Nigeria, because of the fluctuating foreign exchange, the price has risen. In February, when there was the first outcry by the airline operators of Nigeria, the fuel price had moved from 190 naira per liter to about 500, 570, 600. And that was about February to about March 3rd. And at that time, the upper legislative house had called everyone to a meeting, the marketers, the National Petroleum Company, trying to chart a way forward, and said they were going to peg the price for them at 500 naira. But that did not take place. And so over last week, the airline operators of Nigeria had come out to say that they were going to shut down. And of course, that had sent like shivers down the government's spine. That's one mode of transportation in Nigeria because there is a lot of insecurity and our roads are not safe. A lot of people do not want to travel by road. They don't want to take the risk. If you're kidnapped, are you going to raise the ransom and all of that? But of course, we have a few quite poor road infrastructure here and there across the country. So if the airline, I didn't hear that.
So we know that the domestic airlines have rescinded the decision to ground their flights. We know there are negotiations with the government. Are we hearing anything? What's the latest on that? And does it look like it's going to be fruitful, the negotiations with the Nigerian government?
I know at the moment there is a meeting between the parties and the lower legislative house. Whether there would be a consensus, so to speak, I'm not sure. Because what happened in February, I guess governments across Africa and even Nigeria have a way of coming to a decision but never following through with the implementation, because that's where the problem lies. Calling meetings and ensuring that, yes, we come to a consensus is always very easy, but will it be implemented? In February and early March, when they had that meeting, nothing came out of it. The government has said the price will be pegged at 500, but it didn't happen. Let's be hopeful that it could happen this time.
Okay, and you talk about the fact that people rely so much on domestic travel because the roads are not safe. Tell us how the Nigerian economy would be impacted if the airlines go ahead to ground flights if there is no fruitful outcome to the negotiations right now.
Okay, like I said, the road is not very safe. In 2019, aviation was the fastest growing sector, according to our statistics record from the country. And of course, you know that aviation is a connector of people, it's a connector of goods, it's a connector of services and all of that. So that's very critical. If one of your major forms of transportation is crippled, then of course the national economy is affected. Because whether we like it or not, the airline operators pay taxes to government. And once it is out of the way, there are no tax revenue for government as well. So that's one of the critical ways. Plus, intra-country travel is going to be very limited. That road option that many people didn't want to take is what they're going to resort to. And somehow it's also going to affect the economy because...
Well, that was an interaction, though, of the high cost of fuel hitting the aviation sector in Nigeria. That's how we end Business Live. I'm Charles Ayitey. For more news, please log on to myjournline.com. Many thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of our program.